Well, depending on which part of the world you're in, we welcome you either good morning or good afternoon to this first of several quarterly and ongoing webinars for the emergency call taking and records management CAD industry. My name is Mike King, and I'm the global manager for ESRI in this industry. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to those who will present today, but I wanted to mention that I also have with me my colleague Brenton Bromley, who joins us. Brent manages our business partner relationships for this industry and will talk to us at the conclusion perhaps for a moment. I also want to thank Brenda Martinez from our public safety team, who has managed the logistics of this webinar, and we may or may not hear from her as we progress. Today's agenda is shown here on your screen, and we will follow this with perhaps a slight adjustment. We're going to pause after Central County's presentation for a couple of questions. And Kevin, oh, there, great, thanks. If we could just get that agenda up, thank you. First, we'll hear from Central County Emergency 911 Center. This is an organization that dispatches for 34 different agencies in the greater St. Louis region of the United States. Central County's dispatch center was thrust into the national spotlight during the Ferguson unrest of 2014, and I'm sure many of you remember that. Riots and protests erupted after police fatally wounded a man there. I think you'll find their presentation to be very intriguing. Following Central County's presentation on how they've used the ArcGIS platform then and today, we'll be privileged to hear from ESRI's geocoding expert, Bruce Harold. So let me just introduce our speakers and we'll get going on this webinar today. Our presenters from Central County Dispatch are Kevin Atticus and Mark Reese. We also will have Bruce Harold speaking to us from ESRI. Kevin is the Quality Assurance Manager for Central County, where he focuses on strategic planning, on quality action plans, and on overall management collaboration. And I hope, Kevin and Mark, that you might take a moment and maybe just add a little more about your impressive backgrounds. Mark is a certified GIS professional with over 15 years of experience, with specific responsibility for the past 10 years where he has worked within the public safety environment. And then finally, Bruce Harold will speak to us, and he's a product manager in our ArcGIS for desktop team. He also is the technical product manager for geocoding, for geoprocessing, and for data interoperability. Bruce has been involved with ESRI technology for more than 30 years and is very proficient at ESRI software. He also has been an ESRI employee for the past 8 years. So with that introduction, again, thank you for joining us, and if we could, let's turn the time over to Central County.
Thank you, Mike. I am Kevin Atticus, as Mike mentioned. I've been at Central County for 15 years now. I've been in the 911 industry for 25 years. During the Ferguson unrest, I served as the operations manager for the November event. I primarily am here to present from the operations side of things. Mark is going to discuss all the GIS, and it was really his idea to use the ArcGIS online, but I'm here to hopefully give some insight as to what happened to the dispatch side of things during Ferguson. I think, as Mike said, it's fresh on people's mind, and people in this industry tend to be interested in what happens in other centers. Mark?
Like Mike had said, I've been doing GIS now for about 15, 16 years now, last 10 of which have been in the public safety sector. I was really happy to have the opportunity to work with ArcGIS Online and go into that realm of mapping, and the Ferguson unrest situation gave that opportunity to me, which I was very happy to be involved in.
Okay, so what I want to do is give a little background of Central County and just kind of set the stage. As Mike said, we're located in the greater St. Louis area. On your map here, you see the Mississippi River. We're bordered by the Missouri River, St. Charles County, Jefferson County, and this is the state of Illinois. I like to explain what happened to Central County because it really played an important role as to our workload at the time the Ferguson event unfolded. In the St. Louis metropolitan area, there was primarily three fire and ambulance dispatch centers. I should mention we're a secondary PSAP. We dispatch fire and ambulance only. And at the time, pre-2013, we dispatched for 7 agencies. And this is depicting our area before the expansion. We covered that area and we covered this down into Franklin County. This was handled by South County Fire Alarm, and this was handled up here by North Central Fire Alarm. In 2013, South County Fire Alarm decided they didn't want to be a dispatch center anymore. They were handled by a fire district. So those 13 agencies came to Central County, so we had to grow our CAD, hire people, train them, and at the same time, North Central decided they were not going to be able to stay in the dispatching business due to financial reasons. So they also decided to close their doors, and 17 agencies came to Central County. So we grew from 7 to 34 all in the course of about a little over a year. And we had just gone live at the end of October 2013. So well into 2014, we were still tied up with punch list, if you will, finishing projects we had started in CAD, and just overwhelmed really with the amount of work we had to do. Mark was busy with the maps, getting the data corrected and all that. And then after October of 2013, this is the footprint in the St. Louis region. We handle approximately 85% of St. Louis County fire and ambulance dispatching. The red up here is showing you where Ferguson is. This little white spot's the Lambert Airport. But we primarily cover St. Louis County and a good chunk of Franklin County. There's a couple of municipalities in here that dispatch themselves. There's another smaller dispatch center. And then this is St. Louis City over here that's handled by themselves. So we were, as I said, we were still trying to catch our breath from the expansion when in August is when the shooting first occurred in Ferguson. So we went from about 30,000 calls a year pre-expansion. When South County came on, they brought another 30,000, so we're up to 60,000 calls a year. And then when North Central came in, they added another 60,000 calls. We went from 30 to 120,000 calls dispatched. And this is showing, just graphically, where our calls for service were in 2015, right at 130,000 calls for service. You see we have calls well outside of our area, but that's due to mutual aid agreements that we have in place, which very heavily came into play during the unrest. August 9th, we had a shooting in the city of Ferguson. Ferguson Police Department shot Michael Brown. He was pronounced dead on the scene, and the crowd began to gather. Nobody had any idea what was going to happen. What happened was going to happen. Crowds began to increase. Police presence increased. Nighttime came about. They had the fire and the quit trip, and that's depicted above here. Police departments were calling what they call Code 1000s, Code 2000s, bringing in hundreds of officers. The quit trip burned that night, and that really sparked the first night of a week-long daily protesting and rioting. A mobile command post was activated. We sent dispatchers up there to man the command post. Dispatchers were side by side with law enforcement officers. I was up there one night. You could hear shots being fired. You could hear the crowd. You could smell the tear gas. It really got your nerves rattled a little bit. We learned one night, the night that I was at the command post, the goal of the crowd was to take down the command post. So that was a little unnerving when we heard that. But that's when they started deploying the tear gas just to keep the crowds back and keep everyone safe. Really, August 9th was the only night of fires. The rest of the week was EMS events and injuries to protesters, asthma, etc., victims of an assault, primarily was a law enforcement type event. But we were very busy sending dispatchers, trying to come up with new game plans, and working with Mark, we used ArcGIS Online to create caution notes for the field commanders and the dispatchers. We didn't want to put the firefighters and first responders in danger, so Mark drew caution note areas in CAD that showed where the first responders would most be in danger, and that area greatly expanded at night as the crowds got larger and larger. This was very useful in the command post because as we had dispatchers out there, when a call for service came in there, we knew that we had to have police respond as well to make the scene secure and keep everyone safe. And thankfully, I am not aware of any injuries to any fire or EMS responders during the course of both events. There were some injuries to police officers, nothing severe. So that was really used for crew safety and was very useful. And then at this point, Mark was asked to do some other maps, and he'll talk about that now.
Thank you, Kevin. This is an example of, well, that first slide, the previous slide shows an example of the very first layers that I created related to the Ferguson unrest, and those were the polygons that were generated to outline the areas of the caution areas for day and nighttime, as well as the command post area. That was also generated using just a plotter to plot off a map that would get displayed at the EOC. But we also had to have maps to create training maps. We had the potential for incoming dispatchers that would be coming in to help as part of the Missouri telecommunicator emergency response team. So I created this basic map that showed the North County, or northern St. Louis County, showing major roads and the fire departments that made up another area of responsibility within North County. Now at this time, these were all paper maps. So I was using my plotter, my printers, but you know, it dawned on me that, you know, if things really started to escalate, the need for maps would increase tremendously, and I needed to figure out a better way to provide mapping support and other information. So that's when I decided to reach out to ESRI at our local office in St. Charles, Missouri. I spoke with Jean Janot, who was our account rep, who immediately set up a meeting with two of our solution engineers, Dan Haig and Mark Hollingshead. In that same meeting, we had Greg Brown, who was the Region C Mutual Aid Coordinator. So in our discussions in this meeting, we decided that we needed definitely to have the need or requirement to have live incident information and the ability to pull this information from our existing CAD system and provide that in a web-based format, as well as other maps that came up included both critical infrastructure and vulnerable high hazards. When we spoke with ESRI, they also put us in contact with SEMA, or our State Emergency Management Agency, and they had two GIS professionals, Debbie Bridewell and Alexis Giesecker, and we fortunately were able to receive some content for both that critical infrastructure map and the division incident maps from them. When we were speaking with SEMA, they said we should definitely contact St. Louis County Office of Emergency Management for assistance as well, for content with the website, as well as other technical assistance. Specifically, we worked with Brett Lord Castillo, who was a GIS programmer for St. Louis County, and turned out to be an excellent resource for ArcGIS Online and the setup of the website. He also shared police-related ArcGIS Online content and helped, along with ESRI, in providing training to the eventual users of the website. So as a result of the efforts, the Central County 911 ArcGIS Online website was born. We had initially 75 named users across multiple local and state agencies. This slide here depicts the very first base map we created, showing the active incidents from our CAD system. ESRI assisted us, along with actually a paramedic programmer from Fenton Fire Protection District, and created a PHP script which helped pull information from CAD into a comma-separated, delimited file, and then an associated Python script that generated a feature service to update that information in real time in ArcGIS Online. And this is what you see here on this map with the indication of the location of those incidents, as well as the hot zone indicated here in red. Okay. Now Kevin will continue to talk about these areas. This was on a map that we also created for division-based incident map, and Kevin will talk a little bit about those divisions.
So, fire departments did extensive planning. I talked earlier about mutual aid, and we started to come up with ideas of things we could do in CAD. Michael Cooper was our CAD resource manager at the time. He built hundreds of plans into the CAD to make it easier for the dispatchers. We just didn't know what to expect. There was intelligence out there. We knew that at some point in time there was going to be a grand jury verdict announced. Nobody knew when. So we got involved in the planning probably September-ish from the dispatch side of things, but the fire departments have been well into it. And we had plans to bring in mutual aid equipment from across the state. We actually activated some resources from Illinois. I'll get into that a little bit more, but we just didn't know how big it was going to be. Was it going to just be in the Ferguson area? Was it going to be in Clayton, which is where the prosecuting attorney's office is? And then we started hearing rumors that possibly malls and other areas would be targeted. So this map that Mark made in conjunction with Chris McCarthy's work, as he mentioned earlier, was a division-based map in the North County area. So for reference, we're talking about this part of St. Louis County, which is where Ferguson was. It was broken up into divisions. Firefighters were brought in from off-duty, vacations were canceled, and everybody was working 12-hour shifts. The firefighters were still on their 24 to 48-hour shifts, but the incident commanders were in charge of these respective divisions for 12 hours at a time. So Mark made this map to easily see where the divisions were, and they could help with their incident action planning and the forms they had to fill out to give to Chief Brown from the Region C standpoint. So those were very useful, and then also show the active calls and whatnot, vehicles moving. So as I talked about, we had intelligence that there could be problems in other parts of the county, so we asked the districts to send us information of what they thought would be vulnerable for their area. So again, from the Region C standpoint, we could see easily if there was calls for service beginning to happen in these areas. So up here is the Ferguson caution notes, the geographical area that we talked about, and this is the city of Clayton where the prosecuting attorney was. But each district identified whether it was a mall or high hazard office buildings, and we put that all on the map. And it was very useful to see where things were happening and if we needed to move any resources. Thankfully, everything pretty much stayed in one area. So I want to talk about November 24th. That was the day the verdict was announced. This is the same map that Mark showed you a minute ago depicting the nighttime command post area, which was expanded. We're looking at about 1.25 square miles. And the map is showing all the fires that occurred that night. So I just kind of want to walk you through the evening just from the dispatch perspective. It was about 6 o'clock we were notified that they were going to announce the verdict. That set into place all our plans that we had in. We started to move the resources around, stage them in fire stations in North County. We have a map in a little bit that will show where we brought the resources in. The prosecuting attorney had their press conference, lasted about an hour. From a dispatcher's point of view, it was very eerie because, as I said earlier, we're dispatching about 130,000 calls a year. It's 350 a day, so the phone really never stops ringing. During the hour-long press conference, phone rang once or twice. Everyone was glued to the TV. And then after the press conference ended is when the calls for service started coming in for us. Once the sun went down is when we got busy. Multiple calls calling in buildings on fire, and anything in this area had to have police protection. So dispatchers are receiving dozens of calls, a lot of times for the same fire, but there was just so many people out, people reporting it in. We still had the rest of the county going on. I should note that we brought in dispatchers from outside of the area. There's an organization called MoTERT, and we brought those dispatchers in to help because we just didn't know, was the whole county going to be interrupted by violence? Was it going to spread to other counties? We just did not know. So that was probably one of the more unnerving things, was just, we're in this event, but how big is it going to get? It's already big. What happens if it gets bigger? So the fires kept coming in, calls for service kept coming in, and at 10:30ish, the incident commander ordered every firefighter out of this area because of shots being fired at the firefighters. So we had about 30 fires burning at the same time, and we had to send an evacuation alert for all firefighters to evacuate the hot zone. Those of you in the fire dispatch business are familiar with evacuating a house on fire when it goes from an offensive to a defensive fire, but never in my life have I seen an entire area evacuated and just have to let buildings burn until it was safe for the responders. That was a very critical part of the night. I was really at that point worried for firefighter safety, but thankfully, as I said earlier, everyone came out okay. So that lasted until about 5 or so in the morning when they were able to go back in, extinguish the fires, get some rest, and prepare for the next day. This is showing a highlight of some of the incidents. In the center is the August 9th fire, and then around it are various fires from the night. We had an AutoZone, an O'Reilly's, there was a Dollar General. There were several fires that started in buildings they were actually able to extinguish before they caused major damage to the business, so that was impressive too. But I believe at peak time we had 31 buildings on fire at the same time. This is showing how we brought in resources. So this is the Ferguson area. Again, not knowing what was going to happen, we brought in resources from south of St. Louis area. All the departments up north staffed all their engines, staffed the reserve apparatus, and with the trucks we moved in, I would say at any given point in North St. Louis County, we had well over 100 engines / ladders and ambulances. It was a very impressive amount of equipment. That first night, almost every truck that was in North County was used in some way for fires, either dealing with the Ferguson area or just parts of the other North County area that has their normal routine calls for service. So Monday,
Marguerite, you have a call for.
Monday night goes by and we regroup for the next day, bring in resources. Because no damage occurred in any other part of the county, which is what we were hoping for, but we were prepared for all parts of the county to be affected, we brought in resources from St. Charles County, and we brought in some from Illinois. Thankfully for us, this was primarily a one-night event for the fire and ambulance. Now, staffing was still increased for the week, dispatch staffing was increased for the week just in case, but it really was just that night. Everything after that was a law enforcement situation with fire and EMS supporting them. So it was a true testament to the mutual aid system and the amount of planning that goes into this type of work. At that point, fast forward, Mark and I were asked to present at last year's ESRI Conference about what we're talking about today, and Mark and I were watching some of the sessions and just brainstorming, and we started thinking about how can we use ArcGIS online at Central County full-time, and how can we improve our level of service to the 34 agencies we dispatch. And that's when Mark and I really had in-depth conversations, and he went back to ESRI to discuss what our options were, and he'll talk about that now.
So after speaking with ESRI, we talked about the different capabilities that were available to us if we were to upgrade from the account type that we had to a full organizational account. And it got us excited in that we could provide a lot of useful information to the agencies that we serve. So what I want to show really quick here is some examples of what we've kind of been doing at the agency level or central county level, as well as some stuff that we've done now for individual departments in bringing this as a useful tool to all the agencies that we serve. So this first slide shows an operations dashboard that we created that gives our operations manager a view of all active incidents as they're occurring, with a map depicting the location of those incidents, as well as a little table that shows the incident specifics. In addition to this one, we also have another part of this operations view that shows more detailed information, such as assignment to on-scene time. We were able to create this and pull this information from our CAD system and make use of it to show for specific incidents how long is it taking for dispatchers to get the calls out and then for us to provide service to our citizens. We also have, related to this as well, the same type of a view, but a breakdown between fire versus EMS call load. So what I'd like to talk about now is kind of how we organized this content to be able to deliver this effectively for each of our 34 agencies. So what we did was we developed separate groups for each agency, as you can see here. And this allowed us to create a customizable experience for everyone, which included a base map, a logo, and access to mapping content specific to their area of responsibility. An important requirement, though, when we met with the different agencies was they wanted to be able to enforce appropriate data access controls. So to help with this request, we were able to create custom roles to further restrict data modification and access within each department. And then we also created neighbor data layers, which basically were address labels, hydrants, and pre-plan information, but for the neighbors that surrounded them. So this allowed us to provide this information to them visually, but it gave us the control so that they couldn't modify information that was within, outside their own area of responsibility. So this is an example of the base map we created for Millville Fire Protection District. They're currently using this map along with ArcGIS Collector to add and update pipeline locations and adjust hydrant locations and other information to meet ISO reporting requirements. As you can see here on the base map, this is a standard view of what we've done for most of the agencies. Is we have, of course, the active incidents being displayed, but we also modified a Python script to pull the last 24 hours worth of calls. So we could also provide that as an option to turn on and off if they so wish to do so as part of their base map. This next example is an example of one we did for St. Clair Fire Protection District. They're using ArcGIS Online currently, along with Collector, to associate water sources with sites that have limited access to water in the event of a fire. So the red X's indicate sites that they went out using Collector and identified, and then the blue areas indicated water sources or closest water sources that they would use in the event of a fire at those locations marked with the red X. And then just one other example that I have is we worked with Monarch Fire Protection District to create an app that allowed them to use for search and rescue operations. They plan on using it for identifying in real time both primary and secondary search areas when involved in a search and rescue type incident. And they also plan on using it when inspecting building damage after a possible destructive event, such as a flood or a tornado. For each of the 34 departments, we also created a customized mobile app for use with the iPad. So we had here as an example of one we did for Millville. We have their custom logo, a link to their homepage, as well as some custom widgets, including the ability to edit feature services, as well as drawing tools to be able to sketch out plans and for organization, operational situations. So the next thing I'd like to discuss is kind of the behind the scenes. What did we have to do behind the scenes to get this stuff implemented? So to get the data into ArcGIS Online, we created a series of geodatabases, one for each of the 34 departments. And then with each one of those geodatabases, we created domains to restrict data entry, which allowed us to have less data entry errors and give them just a series of choices when populating such things as main size and other attributes. So after we had this data in the geodatabases, well, we needed a way to be able to continuously update it from our existing CAD data layers, specifically from our mobile servers. So to do this, we used Model Builder. So I wrote models in Model Builder that would go out to mobile server and grab the existing GIS layers and update the associated feature classes inside of those geodatabases for each of the 34 fire departments. So once we had the data inside the geodatabases, then we needed a way to get it into ArcGIS Online. So we used a script from ArcGIS.com and modified it to read the publishing information to publish a feature service. But what I did was I modified it so that it used a CSV file, which contained all the information specific to each layer for the script to use when publishing the specific feature service. And then we also wrote models to pull data from ArcGIS Online to update our CAD data once our users notified us that they were finished making edits. So we created this process whereby we could take data from our CAD system, push it out to ArcGIS Online, then take the resulting edits, pull it down from ArcGIS Online, and then push it back into our CAD system. So recently, we actually discovered a kind of a new use for ArcGIS Online, and that is as a collaborative tool when meeting with our various agencies about mapping updates or changes. This here is an example of a water planning tool. We're currently working with Monarch Fire Protection District to verify and edit existing water and no water areas from our CAD system. So the nice thing about this is we were able to have a meeting, sit in a boardroom, open this up on any web browser, and physically modify this layer to meet their requirements for our CAD system, and then turn around and export this out as a shapefile and immediately be able to update it into our CAD system for immediate use for responses.
Mark, can I interject something?
Yes, sure.
I think it's important to note that when Mark and I first started talking about our ideas when we approached ESRI, we were the first ones to come to them with this idea of we want each department to have individual sites, as Mark talked about the logins, but what's important to us is they gave us 150 users, but what was important to us, because Ferguson was fresh in our mind, is we needed the ability to expand those users if we needed to. So we came up with a surge concept and worked with ESRI, and they worked with their legal folks and higher ups. But we have the capability, if we have a tornado come through the area or something like that, because we cover such a large area, that we can call and they can have the surge enacted to where everyone in Region C can have access to it if they need to, and then as the event ends, we're back down to 150 users. That was huge for us, and really was really would have been a deal breaker if we couldn't get that worked out. So thankfully that worked out, and that's where we are today.
That's great. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate what you've done there. And as we make a transition to Bruce, I'd like to just ask a couple of questions. And Kevin and Mark, there are a couple of individual questions that have been forwarded to you from participants. If you could please look at those and answer those. Mark, could you just describe the level of effort that was required for you to implement the free templates that ESRI provides, such as the dashboards that you're showing that you use today?
Well, this was one of the challenges that we actually faced was the level of effort. For specifically the dashboards, the difficult thing was getting the information from our CAD system into ArcGIS Online. So we were able to fortunately have, with that specifically, the benefit of some solution engineers at ESRI who helped us come up with some scripts to be able to do that. But generally speaking, I mean, this was a pretty massive and continues to be a pretty massive undertaking. I mean, we're dealing with 34 different departments, 34 different needs for data, potentially. So, you know, as this thing evolves, I'm sure there's going to be quite a few challenges along the way, but I've tried to create through models and scripting ways to kind of keep up with these updates so that we can kind of make that as seamless as possible.
So as you think about the future for Central County 911, what's your vision in regard to that and ArcGIS and the platform that ESRI provides?
Well, I think using ArcGIS Online can empower our member agencies to take a more active role in improving their own data, which is utilized by our CAD system. This would be accomplished, I think, through increased use of both the Collector app as well as the ArcGIS Online custom applications and widgets.
Well, please continue. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, sorry. I just want to also say that the, you know, an increased use of ArcGIS Online of late has been to assist them in their internal training as well as accreditation goals, as well as more so now through ISO. A lot of requests have come in. I showed that example with St. Clair. We are specifically doing a lot of stuff with Melville Fire District as well as St. Clair in providing, using ArcGIS Online to provide ways to create custom maps to support their ISO requirements as well.
Great, thank you. Well, let's transition over to Bruce Harold from ESRI, who's going to talk about geocoding, a challenge that we see across the United States and globally at different levels. In fact, today I'm sitting with government officials in the country of Jamaica, and one of the challenges these developing countries face is the differing levels of geocoding. So Bruce, if we can, let's turn it over to you and share a little bit of insight on that. And if you could, at the conclusion, I wondered if you could talk about just some of those challenges faced with the differing levels around the world, because we do have members or folks online with us from all parts of the world.
Sure, sure, Mike, and thank you especially also to Kevin and Mark for showing us that powerful leveraging of a couple of our apps, Operations Dashboard and Collector, and Story Maps in ArcGIS Online. So as Mike said, I get the rather dry topic of what's happening under the covers to get those dots on the map. It's our geocoding technology. So I like to think of an address as a spatially challenged coordinate. So people learn how to interpret, say, their home address without any difficulty, but it's a whole different story when you've got to teach a computer how to do the same thing. So what we do here at ESRI is we focus on the logistical use of these coordinates we get out of an address, and it's for routing purposes. So there are the other uses of geocoding, for instance, in mailing workflows, but we are focusing on getting vehicles and people to an address so they can do their work. In the call center scenario, like dispatch, is the most challenging. You have the aspect of immediacy and the outright importance of the job you're doing. So it's very important that we do a good job with our geocoding technology to support the CAD industry. Now, the way that we've approached the problem is to develop a single engine which is available and deployable across our entire stack. So you saw some screenshots there of some mobile apps that work on an iPad, I think it was, some desktop screenshots. Behind the scenes, the services are being delivered by ArcGIS for Server, possibly inside Portal, and even ArcGIS Online, like we've been hearing about today. They're all using the same stack. Now, the end user might not have to care about it, but when I mentioned in the next bullet here that it means we have a common API, the people that write and or customize these applications for you only have to worry about one set of interfaces to work with. So that jargon on the next line, you know, what is a locator, what is an interactive geocode, what is a batch geocode, The people that support you behind the scenes only have to learn all of our things once. So they learn it once and they apply many, many times in the various apps and clients that you go to work with. So we focus on minimizing false positives. I invite you to contrast, say, using a search engine in a browser where pretty much anything can arrive depending on what you typed in, and it's up to you, the user, to filter out the stuff that's not of any use to you. So that's a different challenge entirely to a search engine approach. To help with our minimizing of false positives, and a false positive is sending you correctly to the wrong place, we have a few different things that we can offer in our applications. The first thing is suggestions. That's the type ahead experience. So as you're keying in an address in your dispatch application, you're getting prompted for solutions to what you've already keyed in. Have you already keyed in enough to return to you for your choice the correct address that you meant? So that's available across the stack in web APIs and desktop APIs. So the other thing there is what we call a composite locator functionality. So there are different qualities of coordinate you can get out of different reference data. For example, if you had a database of restaurants in a county, that would be possibly okay if that's all you're finding, just the restaurant. But if you had a locator that had all the rooftop positions or the front door positions of every house and apartment in the city, that's a whole lot better. So a composite locator is the concept of putting together all your data sources in a rank order of quality. So we will search the best stuff you've got or we have first, and we'll fall back successively if we still can't find things, and if necessary to lower quality locators, and we'll always tell you, of course, but we'll always do the best job we can with our global resources. And the last point there, we have automated handling of things like typographical errors, so we know the kind of spelling mistakes that people make, and we have built our engines to expect those omissions of data, so you might not put in a street type when it really does exist and so forth. We handle that for you. If it becomes necessary, we will tune the way that stuff works behind the scenes, but there's a few things there you just don't have to worry about with our geocoding technology. Local data support means, yes, we have in ArcGIS Online and products like our StreetMap premium product, global and of course very detailed US data we're geocoding against, but you can add your own county, streets and or rooftop data and or points of interest, even down to the granularity of adding data for apartments and even floors and levels and buildings. If you have that data, you can use that in conjunction with ours. We refresh our locator technology on a regular schedule. It's quarterly for the StreetMap product. ArcGIS Online, it's semi-annually. So you don't have to worry about, if you're consuming a service, what do I do at the back end? Do I have to worry about whether my data is up to date? No, you don't. So we will deliver for you and or work with you on your schedule to get the data that's most useful to you in front of you at runtime. So how can ArcGIS geocode? I've got a few workflows on the screen here. GeoSearch is really finding a location on a map. So in the leftmost screenshot there, somebody's keying in an address. You can see some suggestions coming up. If they pick one, that will navigate the map to that coordinate derived from that address. So this is basically getting a point on the map and centering your map at that location that you intended. The next one is batch geocoding, and I'll show that in a demonstration before long. If you have a table of addresses, say an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file, you can throw that into our applications and bring up a set of points on the map for further analysis. For example, you might want to do a heat map of the number of incidents, and you might want to filter that by time basis as well. So if you have attribution against the points coming in via addresses, they will be carried through onto the map as well, and you can use them for analyses. And the third one there is reverse geocoding. So you can click on a map and say, hey, what is the street address at this point? Or if you've got some vehicles in the field, they have a GPS device inside them, they're recording their own locations, you can get the street address to give to a human from the coordinate that's coming off the hardware. So where do I get geocode data for ArcGIS? Well, ESRI supplies in ArcGIS Online and our StreetMap products, and a forthcoming third one, the World Geocoder for ArcGIS, geocoding data for the world. So in many countries we have rooftop granularity of data. We'll supply that data for you in either outright on-premise or via services served from ArcGIS Online or on your portal. You don't have to worry about getting hold of that data. You can, like I said earlier, use your own local addresses or streets coming from your county or city. That's good to go too. We will help you if they need any kind of work on the attribution to support geocoding workflows, but you're free and welcome to use your own county streets, also in conjunction with the data that we provide, I might add. The third one, any features in a map. If you have points of interest, and we have many large organizations around the world, for example, putting in oil well heads and other asset information as dots on the map, you can use any of that data that has names as things you can geocode against, and we call that building a gazetteer. So if you have your own data sets of points of interest, you're free to use those in conjunction with the other usual, more normal geocoding data sources as you see fit. So at this point I'll go to a demonstration here, and this happens to be ArcGIS Pro. It's our premier desktop application. We're looking at the campus area of ESRI, so I can say what's here, and it will, subject to my network capabilities, of course, come back with an address. But I won't let that linger here. I think I've got some, there we go, 371 New York Street. That took a bit of time to come up. I'll put that down as a websticle. So that's an example of a reverse geocode. But with the locate pane here, I can use the type ahead functionality that's available to me through our APIs, and say if I was looking for our normal street address for our office, I could go find it like that. And I can choose from that favorite there, and it comes up in the ranked order of candidates here. There's number A. That's the one I really wanted. But I also could go, I could look for a place. This looks like Redlands, California, but if I wanted Redlands Car Wash as a point of interest, if that's where my emergency was, that's available to us too. So street addresses are there, points of interest are there. There's many data sources that are embodied for you in the one interface. So let's go now to look at working in a browser environment. We have the same situation available to us here. So I can go to say our office address here. Now there's more places suggested for me because I've got a wider map here. But so I could use the same suggestions functionality. I could also go, of course, get Redlands Car Wash, have the same experience inside an ordinary web map, as you saw in Mark and Kevin's presentation. So the same functionality is available to us in our big footprint desktop application is available just in the browser, and the same thing in any of our applications. Another thing that's powerful and you're able to leverage ArcGIS Online is I've got some crime data here. I'm just going to drag it into my map. I say yes to my question there about the number of data points that it's wanting to consume. And just from that CSV file dragged in, I'm going to get a smart map here of where all the points lay in the in Sacramento, and I'm going to change the way I'm symbolizing them. So I dragged in a CSV file off my desktop, and I made a heat map here. It happens to be of crimes in Sacramento. I can see where I might want to focus some resources based on what came in through that CSV file. So without having to be a rocket scientist or worrying about where to go for functionality, you can do some very powerful things and leverage ArcGIS Online straight from your browser. So at this point, I think I need to get back to, we've got limited time here, get back to, for Mike to host more questions.
That is great, Bruce. Thank you, and it's always exciting to see what we have and what we are offering. I think one of the really important things that you talked about that maybe you could just reiterate is that agencies can continue to have their localized data. They can continue to try to reconcile that data against the MSAG data that they receive, and eventually the National Emergency Address Database that we hope will come soon. How challenging is that really to work in tiers like you suggested, that if one geocoder isn't giving an answer to move to the next geocoder?
Sure, Mike. Well, basically it's out of the box. So it's a feature of ArcGIS that you can include your local data inside when using our jargon, a locator, with no work to do. So there's no development that needs to be done. All you need to have is access to the data, and you can include that data within the stack that answers your geocoding questions right across our platform.
That's great. Now, if you would, can you think about the question I posed about, let's talk Jamaica and the challenges they face in geocoding versus perhaps the U.S.?
So historically, people started geocoding using street center lines with street names on them, zone values like the postcode and the city, and addresses, sometimes split by parity on the left and the right, so odds one side, evens the other, although they may be mixed. So that's an easy data source to capture. People can do it by digitizing off aerial photos and so forth. So a first place to go for a geocoding solution in green field territory would be street center lines. Now, more advanced jurisdictions these days are going pretty much totally to rooftop addressing and including in 3D. So most areas in the US, for example, are covered now by rooftop data accessibility. We ingest a couple of data sources from some vendors, and that's what we deliver inside our product. So if you have the time and resources to capture the XY position of households or parcels one at a time, then that's going to give you your best quality coordinate.
Great, thanks. Bruce, I want to ask one more question. This came, we have a large number of questions from folks who have listened in today, and for each of those we will get one of the panelists to respond to you personally to answer that. But one question that just came in that I think would be great to answer is, composite geocoders are great, but what's the best practice to push the locally authoritative data up and then into this higher level of geocoding?
Well, Mike, it's fairly simple. You just put your preferred data at the top of the stack in the composite. So it's just a property of the locator when you build it. Nothing has to be recooked at the bottom end. It's really just it's a file on disk that determines how these things behave. You can also use a thing called a category filter at runtime. This is just a finer point here, available at the 10.3 release and later. So if you have a locator that has known categories, you can at runtime call only those categories and force geocodes to be evaluated only at those levels. So if you wanted to exclude, say, postcode or zip code results, you can do so.
Great, thank you. And to the rest of the questions that are piling in, we will get responses. We will also send out a link with additional links that we think might help answer some of the questions that reached a broader audience. We want to again thank Kevin, Mark, and Bruce for their presentations. I'd like to ask Britt Bromley if he could take one moment or two to just explain ESRI's role in the CAD market as it pertains to call taking, dispatch, and records management partnerships and how we work with them. Our goal is to help our partners, which most of you use for your call-taking processes, to further embrace the ESRI technology. So Britt, could you take a moment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. So kind of to dovetail on what Mike just said, so ESRI as a company, we don't build a CAD or RMS or even a call-taking solution, but we really work through our partner channel, and I want to say extensive partner channel, to provide those solutions. So we build relationship with many of the lead CAD companies in the market, whether it be a TriTech, New World Systems, Motorola, Spillman, and there's others. But we work with them, and we really try to make sure they're following best practices with GIS and ArcGIS, obviously, but and make sure that they're aware of different capabilities and extend the reach of their product within their customers. So typically, as most of you on the call, they'll use the technology for routing capabilities or geocoding or geo address validation, but there's many more things that they can do with the ESRI platform. And I think you saw on the first presentation the ability to kind of take some of that data out of the RMS or the CAD and expose it to specific groups within an agency so they get more value of the overall investment into their CAD solution. So again, my role is to work with those CAD partners, and I work closely with Mike King and others, ESRI, to try to further those relationships and further their use of GIS. So that's
Great.
a little bit.
Thank you so much, Britt. Well, we thank each of you for taking time to listen in today, and we really need your feedback. Again, this is the first of what will now become a quarterly webinar designed just for the call-taking, dispatch, and records management industry. ESRI does not build call-taking or records management CAD solutions, but we are the map that is in the app of those solutions you buy. And so our goal is to work with our partners and with you individually to help you better embrace the technology that you've purchased. We invite you to share this webinar when you receive the link to your colleagues who couldn't join us today. We also want to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled for July 27th, and we will be featuring discussions on a national PSAP boundary map, other issues related to Next Generation 911. We will have Dr. Brian Fonts, the CEO of NENA, the National Emergency Number Association, on the line with us. Dr. Fonts will be joined by Dr. Dana Zellman, who is the legal advisor in the Homeland Security Division of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Both are located in Washington, D.C. in the United States. We also would like to invite you to join us at the upcoming National Security Summit held during the ESRI User Conference in San Diego, California on June 25th and 26th. It's San Diego, folks. You can't go wrong by coming and joining up with us, and we'll have more information as we go. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.